The Arizona sun beat down without mercy. Josiah Thorne led his horse through the red dust, each step slower than the last. Dusty had carried him through hell and back, through the cannon fire at Gettysburg, through the flames that took his wife and daughter 7 years ago, through endless miles of frontier that led nowhere and everywhere at once. Now the old mare's legs trembled with every stride. Josiah kept one hand on her neck, feeling the shudder of exhausted muscles beneath the worn hide. He knew what was coming. He had known for weeks, but knowing didn't make it easier. The town of Copper Creek appeared through the heat shimmer like a mirage. Wooden buildings bleached gray by the sun, a water tower, a livery stable with a crooked sign. Josiah guided Dusty toward the stable, speaking soft words she probably couldn't hear anymore. The stable hand was a young man with hay in his hair and sympathy in his eyes. He looked at Dusty for a long moment, then looked at Josiah. "She won't make another day, mister." Josiah nodded slowly. He had known, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way he wasn't prepared for. "Can I have a moment with her?" The stable hand stepped back, understanding. Josiah stood beside his horse in the dim light of the stable. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny ghosts. He pressed his forehead against Dusty's neck and breathed in the familiar scent of horse and leather and years of shared roads. "You carried me through everything," he whispered. "I should have let you rest a long time ago. I was too selfish to let go." Dusty's breathing was shallow and uneven. Her eyes, once bright and alert, had grown cloudy. She leaned into him, trusting him completely even now. Josiah stepped back. He drew his Colt Dragoon from the holster. The weight of it felt heavier than it ever had before. One shot echoed through the stable. Dusty fell without a sound. Josiah holstered the gun and walked out into the sunlight. He didn't look back. Looking back wouldn't change anything. It never did. The main street of Copper Creek was nearly empty in the midday heat. A few horses stood tied to posts, their tails swishing at flies. An old man sat on a porch, whittling wood into nothing in particular. The smell of cooking meat drifted from somewhere nearby. Josiah needed a new horse. That was why he had come here. A rancher up north had offered him work for the winter, and he needed to get there before the first snow. Simple plan. Buy a horse. Keep moving. Find something that felt like purpose. That was when he saw her. A woman stood near the trading post, her back pressed against the wooden wall. She was Apache. Her dark hair braided her clothing marked with traditional beadwork. She held a bundle of supplies against her body at an awkward angle. Her left arm was bandaged, and she cradled it close to her ribs, like it pained her to move it. Two men had her cornered. One of them was tall, with a scar running down his left cheek. He reached out and grabbed the bundle from her arms. "Your husband's dead," the scarred man said. "That land don't belong to you no more. Mr. Cade made that clear enough." The woman didn't respond. She kept her eyes low, making herself small. Josiah recognized that posture. He had seen it in soldiers who had been beaten too many times. People who learned that fighting back only brought more pain. The second man laughed. "Maybe she don't understand English, Virgil." "She understands fine," Virgil replied. "She's just smart enough to know what happens if she makes trouble." Josiah didn't think about what he did next. Thinking would have meant hesitating. Hesitating would have meant walking away. And walking away wasn't something he could do. He crossed the distance in 6 long strides. His hand closed around the grip of his Colt, and he pressed the barrel against the back of Virgil's neck. "Drop the bundle. Step away from her." Virgil froze. His partner's hand moved toward his own gun, but stopped when he saw Josiah's eyes. There was something in those eyes that made men reconsider their choices. "Easy now, stranger," Virgil said slowly. "This ain't your concern. I'm making it my concern." Virgil turned his head slightly, trying to see the man behind him. What he saw made him drop the bundle. The two men backed away, hands raised just enough to show they weren't reaching for weapons. You just made a big mistake, Virgil said. Harlan Cade runs this territory. He's going to hear about you. Let him hear. The two men mounted their horses and rode away, but not before Virgil looked back one more time. His eyes promised that this wasn't over. Josiah holstered his gun and turned to the woman. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not gratitude. Something more cautious than that. You just made enemies with the most dangerous men in this territory, she said. I've been making enemies my whole life. A few more won't change much. She bent down to gather her scattered supplies, wincing when her injured arm moved wrong. Josiah crouched beside her and picked up a can that had rolled away. Your arm needs looking at, he said. The doctor here won't treat Apache. Josiah felt a familiar anger rise in his chest, the kind of anger that had no target because the target was everywhere. It was woven into the fabric of every town and every territory he had ever passed through. Where's your home, he asked. 8 miles west, past the dry creek bed. That's Cade territory. It's my land. My husband worked it, built a cabin on it, died for it. Josiah stood up the supplies in his arms. I'll walk with you. Help carry these. She studied him for a long moment. Whatever she was looking for, she must have found enough of it because she finally nodded. My name is Kaya. Josiah Thorne. They walked west as the sun began its long descent toward the horizon. Kaya moved with the careful grace of someone who knew this land intimately. She pointed out landmarks that Josiah would have missed. A cluster of rocks that marked a water source. A ridge where riders could be spotted from miles away. A dry creek bed that flooded dangerously in storm season. She spoke of her husband without prompting. His name was Running Wolf. He built our cabin with his own hands, cleared the land, planted what would grow in the soil. She paused, her jaw tightening. 8 months ago, Harlan Cade came with 7 men. They wanted the land. Running Wolf refused to leave. They shot him and threw his body in the river. Josiah listened without interrupting. He understood loss in a way that didn't require words. Why do you stay? He asked finally. Kaya stopped walking and turned to face him. The setting sun painted her features in shades of gold and copper. Because leaving means they win. Because this is the only place where I still feel him. Because I would rather die on my own land than live somewhere else as nothing. Josiah nodded slowly. He understood that too. The sky darkened as they walked. Clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and black and promising violence. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. Storm coming, Josiah said. I know. We need to hurry. They increased their pace, but the storm moved faster. The first drops of rain began to fall when the cabin came into view. A small structure of weathered logs, smoke rising from a patched chimney, surrounded by a fence that needed repair in several places. They reached the door just as the sky opened up. Inside the cabin was small but orderly. A single chair near the hearth, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, tools that had been repaired and re-repaired until the handles were nearly worn through. On the wall hung a Winchester rifle, well-oiled and ready. Kaya lit a lantern while Josiah set down the supplies. Water was already dripping through patches in the roof, forming small puddles on the dirt floor. Let me look at your arm, Josiah said. Kaya hesitated, then sat down in the chair. Josiah knelt beside her and carefully unwrapped the bandage. The injury was worse than she had admitted. A bad sprain, possibly a partial fracture. The joint was swollen and hot to the touch. 2 days ago, she said, a fall. He worked in silence, rewrapping the arm with fresh bandages from her supplies. His hands were steady, practiced. He had treated wounds before, in the war, in the years after. You learned to do what needed doing. When he finished, he stood and looked around the cabin. The roof had several weak spots. The door frame was slightly warped. The window shutters hung crooked on their hinges. This place needs work, he said. I know. I've done what I can alone. Rain hammered against the roof. Thunder rolled across the sky like cannon fire. Josiah looked at the door, then at the woman in the chair, then at the storm raging outside. "I'll stay until it passes," he said, "if that's all right with you." Kaya met his eyes. "And after it passes," Josiah didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure there was one. Morning came gray and wet. Josiah woke on the floor near the hearth, his coat rolled under his head as a pillow. The fire had burned down to embers during the night. Kaya was already awake, standing at the window, watching the rain-soaked land beyond. "The roof held," she said without turning around. "Barely." Josiah stood and stretched the stiffness from his back. He was 43 years old, and his body reminded him of every mile he had traveled, every battle he had fought, every loss he had carried. He walked to the door and opened it. The air outside was cool and clean, washed by the storm. Puddles reflected the gray sky. The fence posts leaned at angles that suggested years of neglect and harsh weather. "I'll fix the roof today," he said, "before the next storm comes." Kaya turned to look at him. "You're not leaving?" "Not yet." He didn't explain further. He wasn't sure he could explain it to himself. There was something here that held him. Not the woman exactly, though she was part of it. Something about this place, this forgotten piece of land that a widow defended alone against men who wanted to take everything from her. He climbed onto the roof with tools he found behind the cabin. The damage was extensive. Patches on top of patches, each one a temporary solution that had become permanent through necessity. Kaya had done remarkable work for someone with no training, but the roof needed more than patches now. Josiah worked through the morning, replacing rotted boards with salvaged wood, reinforcing weak beams, sealing gaps where water had found its way through. The labor felt good. It had been a long time since he had built something instead of destroying it. When he came down for water, Kaya handed him a cup without speaking. She watched him with an expression that had shifted slightly from suspicion toward something closer to curiosity. "You work like a man who knows what he's doing," she said. "I've fixed a few roofs in my time." "Before the war," he looked at her sharply. She met his gaze without flinching. "I know a soldier when I see one," she said. "My husband knew them too. He fought alongside some, against others." Josiah drank the water slowly. "I was at Gettysburg, and a dozen places before and after." "The fire in your eyes didn't come from building roofs." He set down the cup. "No, it didn't." The afternoon brought a discovery that changed everything. Josiah walked the perimeter of the property, checking the fence line, studying the terrain. He found what he was looking for near the eastern boundary: fresh hoof prints in the softened earth. At least 4 horses, maybe more. They had circled the cabin in a wide arc, staying just out of sight from the windows. They were watching, waiting. He didn't tell Kai about the tracks, not yet. Instead, he asked her about the land, the high ground, the blind spots, the places where an enemy could approach unseen. She showed him everything her husband had taught her: the ridge to the north with a clear view of the eastern approach, the dry creek bed that could hide riders until they were dangerously close, the rock formation to the west that created a natural defensive position. They were still discussing terrain when the riders appeared, 7 of them silhouettes against the afternoon sky. They approached from the north, taking their time making sure they were seen, a show of force. The man in front was tall and thin, with silver hair visible beneath his hat, and a face weathered by decades of hard living. He wore a brown leather coat and sat his horse with the straight-backed posture of a military officer. Harlan Cade. Josiah stepped out of the cabin, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. Kaya appeared in the doorway behind him, the Winchester in her hands. Cade stopped his horse 20 paces from the cabin. His men spread out behind him, their hands near their weapons, but not drawing. "Not yet." "You must be the stranger from town," Cade said. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant, a southern accent refined by education. "Josiah Thorne. I asked around about you. Former Sergeant Union Army, Gettysburg, Antietam. A man who knows how to fight." Josiah said nothing. I was an officer myself, Confederate, different sides of the same bloody field. Cade tilted his head slightly. The war's over, Thorne. No reason for us to be enemies. We're not enemies because of the war. Cade smiled, but his eyes remained cold. You're right. We're enemies because you're standing on my land. This land belongs to the woman behind me. I don't see your name on any deed. Deeds. Cade chuckled softly. Paper, laws. Those things don't mean much out here. What matters is strength, the ability to hold what you claim. He leaned forward in his saddle. She can't hold this land. You know it. I know it. Every man behind me knows it. Maybe she has help now. Cade studied Josiah for a long moment. 3 days. That's how long I'm giving her to leave. You can go with her, or you can go your own way. There's no shame in walking away from someone else's fight. And if we're still here after 3 days, Cade's smile faded, then you'll both end up in the river, next to her husband. He turned his horse and rode away. His men followed, dust rising behind them like a brown cloud. Josiah watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned to Kaya. We have 3 days. I know. Do you have enough ammunition for that rifle? Enough. The next 2 days were spent preparing. Josiah dug shallow trenches around the cabin, deep enough to provide cover for a man lying flat. He piled sandbags beneath the windows. He measured distances to key landmarks and memorized them. 50 yards to the fallen tree, 80 yards to the large rock, 120 yards to the rise where Cade's men would likely position themselves. Kaya worked beside him, her arm improving each day. She cut brush to clear sight lines. She set traps along the eastern approach, dead branches that would snap loudly if someone stepped on them. She showed him where her husband had hidden a cache of extra ammunition wrapped in oilcloth beneath a flat stone. They spoke little, but the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of people who understood each other without needing words. On the evening of the second day, they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset. The sky burned red and orange, painting the desert in colors that seemed too beautiful for a place where violence was coming. Why are you doing this? Kaya asked. Josiah considered the question. I lost everything once. My wife, my daughter, our home. There was nothing I could do to save them. By the time I knew about the fire, they were already gone. He fell silent. Kaya waited. After that, I kept moving. Couldn't stay anywhere. Couldn't build anything. Because building meant caring, and caring meant losing, and I couldn't lose anything else. He looked at her. But running gets tired, and sometimes you find something worth stopping for. Kaya nodded slowly. She didn't ask if she was that something. She didn't need to. The attack came on the 5th night, earlier than expected, before the ultimatum expired. That was Cade's way, Josiah realized. Make promises, then break them. Keep your enemies off balance. 6 shadows approached through the darkness, moving in from 3 directions. Josiah was in the trench near the eastern fence. Kaya was at the cabin window with the Winchester. He waited until the first man crossed into range of the fallen tree. 50 yards, an easy shot in daylight, harder in darkness. But Josiah Thorne didn't miss. The Colt Dragoon roared. The shadow fell. Kaya's Winchester cracked almost simultaneously. Another man went down, clutching his shoulder. Confusion erupted. The remaining attackers scattered, seeking cover, firing wildly toward the cabin. Muzzle flashes lit up the night like lightning. Bullets whined overhead, thudding into wood and dirt. The fight lasted 10 minutes. When silence finally returned, 2 of Cade's men lay dead on the ground. The others had retreated, dragging their wounded with them. Josiah ran to the cabin. Are you hurt? Kaya lowered the rifle. No, you... Fine. They stood in the darkness, breathing hard, listening for sounds of a second attack. None came. They'll be back, Josiah said, with more men. I know. He looked toward the east where the faintest hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. 12 miles in that direction was a telegraph station. If he could get there, he could send word to Marshal Ezekiel Farrow at Fort Yuma. Zeke was an old friend from the war, a man who could bring federal authority into this territory, but going to the telegraph meant leaving Kaya alone. "I'll go at first light," Josiah said. "Be back before noon." Kaya studied his face. "If you don't come back, I won't blame you. You've already done more than anyone else ever has." Josiah shook his head. "I'll come back." The ride to Dry Gulch took 3 hours. Josiah pushed the horse hard, but not too hard. He needed speed, but he also needed the animal to get him home. The terrain was rough, and he avoided the main trails where Cade's men might be watching. The telegraph station was a small building next to a general store. The operator was an old man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers who looked up with surprise when Josiah burst through the door. "I need to send a message. Fort Yuma. Marshal Ezekiel Farrow." The operator blinked. "That'll take time. Fort Yuma's 40 miles. Just send it." Josiah dictated the message quickly. Location, situation, names. He signed it with his old military rank, hoping that would carry weight with whoever received it first. "How long until he gets this?" "Half a day, maybe. If he's there. If he's not." Josiah didn't wait to hear the rest. He was already mounting his horse. The ride back was faster. Desperation drove him. Something in his gut told him that Cade wouldn't wait. The failed attack had been a probe. The real assault would come soon. When he was 3 miles from the cabin, he saw the smoke, a black column rising against the pale morning sky. Josiah kicked the horse into a full gallop. The animal responded, sensing his rider's urgency. The ground blurred beneath them. The smoke grew larger, darker. The cabin was surrounded. 7 men this time, plus Cade on horseback at the rear, directing the attack. The roof was on fire. Flames licked up from one corner where they had thrown torches. Kaya was behind the sandbags at the window, the Winchester barking defiance at the attackers. She had already taken down 1 man. His body lay 10 feet from the door, but she was outnumbered, outgunned, running out of time. Josiah didn't ride straight in. He circled to the east toward the rock formation Kaya had shown him, the high ground, the blind spot in Cade's formation. He left the horse behind the rocks and climbed quickly, ignoring the protest of his aging muscles. At the top, he had a clear view of the battlefield below. Virgil Slade was creeping toward the back door, a pistol in each hand. If he got inside, Kaya was dead. Josiah steadied the Colt against the rock, drew in a breath, let half of it out, squeezed the trigger. The shot took Virgil in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground before he could reach the door. Before anyone could react, Josiah fired again, and again. 2 more men fell, caught completely by surprise from a direction they hadn't expected. Chaos erupted below. Cade's men scattered, seeking cover, shouting confused warnings to each other. They didn't know how many attackers they were facing. In the confusion, it sounded like an army had appeared from nowhere. Cade understood immediately. He dismounted and began climbing the rocks from the other side, moving with the practiced grace of an experienced fighter. Josiah reloaded quickly. He knew what was coming. They met on the ridge 15 feet apart. Cade was breathing hard from the climb, but his hand was steady on his gun. The morning sun was behind him, casting his shadow long across the red stone. "You should have taken my offer," Cade said. "Money to leave, freedom to walk away. Instead, you chose to die for a woman who isn't even your own kind." Josiah's voice was flat. "I've seen men like you before, in the war, taking what they wanted, burning what they couldn't take, leaving nothing but graves behind them. That's how the world works. The strong survive, the weak become dust. Sometimes the righteous win." Cade smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Let's find out." His hand moved toward his gun. Josiah was faster. 1 shot. Cade's body jerked backward. His pistol fell from his fingers unfired. He stood for a moment, swaying, a look of surprise on his weathered face. Then he collapsed. Josiah looked down at the man who had terrorized this territory for years. There was no satisfaction in the killing, only the grim recognition that it had been necessary. Below, the remaining attackers saw their leader fall. Some ran. Others threw down their weapons and raised their hands. The fight was over. Josiah descended from the rocks and ran toward the cabin. The fire had spread, but Kaya was already throwing water from the well, fighting the flames with desperate energy. He joined her, and together they beat back the fire until only charred wood and smoke remained. They stood in the aftermath, surrounded by bodies and burned debris. "You came back," Kaya said. "I told you I would." Marshal Ezekiel Farrow arrived the following afternoon. He came with 4 federal cavalry, their blue uniforms dusty from hard riding. Zeke was a big man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. He surveyed the scene, the bodies, the burned roof, the woman with the bandaged arm standing next to the man with the smoking gun. Same as always, Josiah. One man against the world. Not alone this time. Zeke nodded slowly. He looked at Kaya. "There's documentation at Fort Yuma, claims filed against Cade's operations, testimony about his methods. This," he gestured at the carnage, "will be the final evidence needed. Your land is legally yours. No one will challenge that now." Kaya said nothing, but something in her posture changed. A tension she had carried for 8 months finally began to ease. Zeke's men rounded up the survivors and prepared to transport the bodies. Before he left, Zeke pulled Josiah aside. "You planning to stay?" Josiah looked at the cabin with its burned roof and damaged walls. He looked at the land stretching toward the horizon. He looked at the woman who was already gathering tools to begin repairs. "For a while," he said. Zeke smiled just slightly. "Good. You've been running long enough." 1 week later, the roof was nearly finished. Stronger this time. Built to last through storms and seasons and years. Josiah hammered the final shingle into place and climbed down the ladder. His new horse, a sturdy bay he hadn't named yet, grazed beside the horse that had belonged to Kaya's husband. 2 animals side by side, learning to share the same pasture. Kaya emerged from the cabin with a cup of water. Her arm had healed completely now. She moved with confidence again. "How long are you staying?" she asked, the same question she had asked before. Josiah took the water and drank slowly. He looked at the land, the repaired fence, the cleared fields, the cabin that was becoming something more than a survivor's shelter. "Long enough to build a proper stable," he said. "After that," he turned to meet her eyes, "I don't see any reason to leave." Kaya didn't smile. She wasn't a woman who smiled easily, but something softened in her expression. Something that looked like the first stirring of peace after a long, long war. "The stable will need 2 people to build," she said. "I know." She turned and walked back toward the cabin. The door stayed open behind her. Josiah watched the sunset paint the desert in shades of red and gold. For 7 years, he had been running from memories he couldn't outpace, searching for something he couldn't name in towns and territories that all blurred together. He wasn't running anymore. On this forgotten piece of borderland between the red dust and the burning sky, a drifter had finally found a reason to stop. Josiah Thorne stayed through that winter and the spring that followed, and many seasons after that. The small cabin grew into a working ranch. But those are stories for another time. If this story moved you, we have many more tales of the Old West waiting to be told. Subscribe now and you'll never miss another adventure.